Tihei Māori ora. Te whare I tu nei, te whenua I te koto nei, tēnā korua. He mihi nui ki te mana whenua o tēnei rohi. Waitaha ka te mamoe kai tahu. Ki na mauna whakahi, ki na wai tiri nei, ki na rangatira huhua, tēnei te mihi, tēnei te mihi. Ki no mate o te wā, rātu kuia, whetu rangatia, haere, haere, moi mai rā. Rātou kia rātou, tātou kia tātou. I ngā rangatira, I ngā ahurangi, I ngā kaimahi, I ngā tauera, I ngā tangata katoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Ahurangi David McBride, ngā mihi nui kia koe. He mihi hoki tēnei ki tō whānau me o hoa. He rā whakahira tēnei, he kaupapa nui kia mua I a tātou. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Tony Ballantyne and I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor External Engagement for the University, and I have the real honour and privilege of hosting this inaugural professorial lecture this evening. So a very warm welcome to all of you gathered here in Castle Lecture Theatre in person. A very warm greeting to everyone who is online, both at this very moment or who may be watching in the future. These are very special events. The fact that we are wearing our robes is an indicator of that. In the modern university, at least the modern University of Otago, we do not wear the robes very often. We rarely wear them, and when we do, it's a sign of a special occasion. So two main examples are a graduation, when we come together to celebrate our students, the culmination of their academic journey and their graduation, and these inaugural professorial lectures when we come together to celebrate the success, the quality, the distinguished careers of our academic colleagues who have been promoted to the highest rank within the university, the rank of professor. These events are also special because they celebrate activities that are the very heart of the university, the scholarly the scholarly journey, teaching, research, service for the discipline for the academic unit, and in support of our students and our stakeholding communities. So these are an opportunity for us to come together and to celebrate those things that really make the university the university. So this evening we come together to celebrate the outstanding career of Professor McBride and his contributions as a researcher, as a teacher, and as a member of our community here at the University of Otago. These are also opportunities for us to hear the newly promoted staff member reflect on their journey, to look back, but also to look forward and to take stock of what their career has produced so far, but maybe also think about what the future might hold for the discipline or the area. So we look forward to hearing your reflections, Professor McBride. So Kati, that's enough from me. It's just wonderful to see everybody, and I'm now delighted to hand over to Emeritus Professor John Broughton, who will provide a fuller introduction of Professor McBride. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora koutou katoa. It gives me great pleasure this evening to introduce Professor David McBride, aka Lieutenant Colonel McBride, and someone who I had the pleasure of to work with in Veterans Health Research in the Department of Preventive and Social Medicine of the Otago Dunedin School of Medicine. And a special welcome to Dave's extended family and friends who are here with us this evening. Professor McBride is an occupational environmental physician, a clinical discipline of which military medicine is a subspecialty. His particular area of research expertise lies in occupational and environmental epidemiology and biostatistics. His clinical interests lie in the effects of physical agents, noise and vibration, chemical agents, particularly persistent organochlorine compounds and dioxins, the effects of psychosocial environment and veterans' health. His military connections as a reservist has given him insights into military health. He joined the Queen's University in Belfast Officers Training Corps in 1974 and was commissioned into the Royal Corps of Transport as a second lieutenant in 1981. And on coming to New Zealand, he thought he had retired, but no. He joined the Royal New Zealand Army Medical Corps in 1995, going on to command the Otago and South Regiment in 2000, with operational experience in both East Timor and Afghanistan. David will enlighten us this evening on the scope of occupational medicine and veterans' health, with an emphasis on the transition from military to civilian life and the well-being of contemporary veterans. Please join me in welcoming Professor David McBride to the podium.
Thanks, John. Well, I never thought I'd be standing here, and I expect you didn't either, but however. Occupational medicine, how does that work? People often ask me that. What is occupational therapy? No, occupational medicine. Preventing hazards becoming a health risk is what it's all about. And we classify hazards: chemical, physical, noise and vibration; biological, bacteria, virus and molds; and ergonomic or biomechanical; and lastly, psychosocial. Here's an example I often use. We have a carpenter, a joiner. In fact, this chap's a furniture maker. So, you know, you've got to get your job titles right for a start. And he's doing a thing called conversion. He's selected a piece of wood and he's going to cut it. Seems a simple process, eh? So the way we look at preventing occupational disease is through source, from the source of the material he's using and the thing he's using to cut it. Then we look at the path to the receiver, and then we look at the receiver himself in this case. And it's not just about looking, it's about a careful look and an analysis. And if you look closely, you can see he hasn't got his hearing protection on quite right, and neither are the glasses quite right. So that's going to fail for a start, right? And then we need to think about the source. So the source is here, and it's the piece of wood he's cutting, whatever that piece of wood is made of. We'll talk about that shortly. And if you look carefully with the eye of faith, I don't know whether can you or not, there's a slot in the saw just there. And that stops the saw ringing, because if you think of a circular saw, there's a ringing sound, and there's noise from the gears, and there's noise from the motor, and it all gets slogged out. So that's the depth of detail we need to go into. And here's the risk management process. This is it in a nutshell. Muazzam Zaidi and I from the department have been asked to write a chapter for Hunter's Diseases of Occupation. So it's all about the risk management process. At the strategic level, back shortly. At a strategic level, nothing's going to go wrong, it will. You can see at the top that government and tertiary bodies identify hazards, or sometimes it's an alert clinician to identify the thing as a hazard. And then we look to say a dose-response relationship, for which you've got to know the mechanism. And then from that, we can set exposure standards. So that's all epidemiology up at the top, basically. Then we come onto the workplace, and we come into the workplace and do an exposure assessment. I've just done a short one there, right? And we do a risk characterization estimation. And lastly, we design the control strategy, do some monitoring, which is where we start to fail, right? Do some monitoring of whatever it is, and then assess the health effect in the workplace, and we're doing that very badly. And lastly, we have education and training, which also isn't done well. People have to know what they're dealing with. Okay, so those two could do with being done better. So the workplace exposure standard for hardwood dust is 0.5 milligrams per meter cubed because it's a carcinogen. For softwood dust, it's 2 milligrams per meter cubed because it's a sensitizer. And nothing works without enforcement. And this is where we fall down all the time. Nothing works. Like the red traffic lights in Dunedin don't work, no enforcement. Control in a nutshell. Maintenance is always sort of top of the list. Education and training to alter behavioural influences. Behaviour is important. One must be well behaved, or one must understand how people behave in the workplace. Then we have maintenance, because if the gear's slogged out, it's going to be louder and it's going to create more dust. And lastly, and the thing that's most often used in New Zealand, personal protective equipment should be the last thing on the list, but it's often not. Right. So Moira Chan Young was a respiratory physician, and she worked at the sawmills in British Columbia, and she was noticing an awful lot of asthma in the sawmill workers. Then they imported the red cedar into Australia because it was cheap, and they had an outbreak of occupational asthma there. So that's the astute clinician. And the substance responsible was plicatic acid. Now, we also have wood acids here in New Zealand, and such as 1S, 4AS, 10AR, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4A, 9, 10, 10 octahydro, 6 hydroxy, 1,4A dimethylphenanthrene, 1 carboxylic acid, just to give it its full name. The mechanisms, now you know about PM10, PM2.5 and PM0.1. PM10 is used in the standards, environmental standards, because you can breathe it in, right? PM2.5 is what can get into the chest. PM2.5 would what get right down to the alveoli. Oops. For example, asbestos, and we still don't know how asbestos gets to the periphery of the lung and the mechanism by which it causes pleural mesothelioma. So there's still a lot to learn. So here's something I use when I teach the medical students, right? Give them clinical examples of what's going on. This is asthma. I don't know whether it's asthma called the wood dust or not, but it's a type 1 hypersensitivity reaction, inflammation of the bronchi, and eventually the smooth muscle gets thicker and the mucus layer gets thicker, and then you get mucus secretion, mucus plugging, and ventilation perfusion abnormality, which I was teaching the medical students the week before last. So it's just a simple way of making a link between disciplines, which is what they get wrong all the time. They're not making those links between disciplines. Simple way of doing it. Now, we did this in 1998, measuring wood dust, because this is something that's never well controlled, right? So in 1998, you can see what the levels were. The range was 0.45 down here to 30.58, and 46% were in excess of the WES of 5 at that time. Fast forward to 2017, Jerome Duas and the folks from Massey did another study. Geometric mean of 2.5, 0.4 to 48.4. A huge difference between those two surveys and all that time. And I think the last time we did a respiratory survey in a sawmill properly was probably in somewhere 2000, 2001, so it's not good. Regulation and enforcement. 1992 wasn't too bad. The Health and Safety and Employment Act, Occupational Safety and Health Service, Department of Labour. We had departmental practitioners, one in each OSH office. I was one here in Dunedin, about 14 total, and 2 senior DMPs, Evan Dryson and Chris Walls, up at headquarters in Wellington. Then on 19th November 2010, things changed with Pike River and the coal mine. They brought in the Health and Safety Work Act 2015, formed WorkSafe, and all of a sudden we had no doctors at all. We had one doctor for about 2 years who resigned, but that was it. No doctors, so we've gone backwards there, I'm afraid. So how do you get to be a professor? Well, first you go to school and you get good grades, and then you get into medical school, and 50 years later then you do distinguished things. You do teaching, you do research, and you do community service. All good. So that's what is occupational medicine, right? It's simple, really. You just translate those hazards into something else, psychosocial hazards, military service. A group of people, has an artificial intelligence, wonderful. Look, there's a group of people in military uniforms. So when I went to school, I had made the big mistake of joining the Army Cadet Force and learning how to perform undetected crime, which John was talking about earlier. Because if you have 12 years of undetected crime, you get recognised for it, right? So the trick is, and ask any soldier, any ex-soldier this, or any serving soldier this, the most important thing, not to get caught, right? Here's a good example of us way back then in a place called Hamer with the 2nd Battalion, the Royal Irish Rangers. And you can see some of these children are waving bottles of what looks like champagne around. At 16 and 17, crime. Shocking, but undetected crime, so it was fine, not a problem. Having gone through that experience of being in the Army Cadet Force and all the rest of that stuff, I came to do my A-levels, going to medical school, and what do you know? I got a C, a D, and a O pass, and I had to get 3 Bs by Christmas. So I was offered a job as a health inspector, and I thought, no, I'll go back. I'll do it again. I want to be a physician. So I went back to school and converted the D. I converted C, a D, and an O pass to 3 Bs. I got the B in chemistry by Christmas, so I was off and I got there in the end. I had to do it for my mother because she was so upset that I didn't get enough into medical school, so that's why I did it, my mother and father. Here we go. So what was it like to be in medical school? Right, why did I go to medical school in the first place? Because my father was a post office telephone engineer and my mother was a teacher. And for some reason I ended up quite a lot with my father in the van. One of my mother's favourite expressions was, for God's sake, sit down and shut up, David. So I suppose it was respite care, but I went with my father around nearly every telephone exchange in County Down, looking at the equipment, poking my fingers in it, getting mildly injured, having mild shocks, and learning about how things work. And it's fascinated me ever since. So here's a group of medical students in Sandymount Street in Belfast. It was really no different, apart from bombs and bullets from medical school anywhere else, say Birmingham, Bristol. And I worked my way through because my father had to pay for the first year's fees and tuition. I thought that's hugely not fair. So I had to get a job, and the most reliable job was with the Officers Training Corps. So going to summer camps and all those things. And the other thing was joining the Royal Ulster Constabulary as a reserve constable. That was reliable employment as well. So I used to go home on a Friday, and with the Saturday morning I was out on duty, and then a Sunday I was out on duty, and sometimes Monday as well. But it was really reliable employment for all the school holidays. It was bloody dangerous, but it was reliable. And it funded certain activities, if you could imagine what those activities were. And when I went to medical school, all the Macs stayed together. All the McAs and McBs stayed together because they didn't have computers in those days. And it would have been a terrible chore to start moving people around, so we all got to know each other really well. There's Miriam McCarthy right at the right-hand side there. And it was good. We enjoyed it. Then eventually you graduate. Artificial intelligence was working in this case, a couple of men on graduation grounds. And after you graduate, then you can think, what I want to do for a living. I am now a physician. So I thought I'd give ENT surgery a go. I'd always been sort of fascinated by ENT surgery. It was something to do with the head mirrors. I've still got mine. Because it required quite a lot of skill to wear it properly for a start, but to use it to focus the light and see people's vocal cords and their larynx and into their ears. And I was very good at taking tonsils out. So that was good, and I was reasonably happy as an ENT senior house officer. My mate Jeff Crowther was less so. So Jeff and I were talking one day, and he said, I'm sick of this. what do you think I should do? And I said, become an occupational physician. He said, what do you mean occupational physician? And I told him about what the job was, because I knew what the job was. He said, right. And he went and got a job as Chief Medical Officer of the Royal Ulster Constabulary, so there you are. And he stayed there for years. All good. Uh-oh. System's run out of something. That's good. So what do you do then if you're trained in ENT surgery? I liked how ears worked. I loved looking in ears, guddling in ears, and helping people who were deaf. And in Belfast, we had a lot of deaf people because of the linen mills and the heavy industry that we had there at the time. So I decided, right, occupational physician is what I'm going to be. And I went for a couple of interviews, one with London Transport on a stinking hot August day, strap hanging for an hour to get to the interview. Didn't perform well. I thought, thank God for that. And the next one that came up was with British Coal in Stoke-on-Trent. And they asked me at the interview, okay, what do you think? Do you think audiometry has any place in preventing noise-induced hearing loss? I said, of course. Right, and I got right into it, so I got that job. Lucky for me. And the one thing about occupational medicine is you can't do it without being in the workplace. And I used to terrorise the personnel managers of the mine by trying to get down the mine as often as I could and talking to people. Now, we had an experimental coal liquefaction plant at Point of Ayre Colliery because they were worried about coal in those days, the demise of coal, because they see it not far away. So they were liquefying coal. And there was these things called dioxins in coal liquefaction. And in my course at the University of Birmingham, in my training, my registrar training, I did a talk about toxicology. And this is what we did in those days. Do you remember the overhead, writing in the overhead slides? My goodness. There was exposure standards, and here 200 mils of blood is what you needed to do the test, which is good. But it's fascinating stuff, dioxin. The guinea pig, the poor old guinea pig, is very sensitive. 1 microgram per kilogram will kill 50% of guinea pigs. However, the hamster is resistant. Oh, don't let force quit. I think this is going to be a recurrent theme. The hamster is highly resistant to dioxins. And in humans, the half-life was 8 years, and we'll come back to that. Now we're verifying Microsoft Outlook app. It just gets better and better. My computer has it in for me. So, I thought with this, my talk was relatively well received. I thought I'd write to the BMJ about dioxins. And this is the days when the BMJ wrote back to you. Stella O'Leary wrote me a letter. And you can see what it says. I'm afraid we're not prepared to publish it in the BMJ. We included that it was not authoritative enough to be a leading article in the journal. The message was too diffuse. None of the readers on our panel felt they had a clearer idea of the subject after reading the paper than before. I am very sorry to have to disappoint you. That's one of the treasures I keep in a special folder, Dell. I'll show you where it is. Oh, God, here we go. One of the great things about in the military is you learn to perform under adversity. I'll probably get more adverse. Here's another thing that I've kept for all these years. Lieutenant McBride can show signs of incredible silliness on occasions, and other times produce very good results, particularly when lecturing. He plays a full part in the regimental way of life. That was, in fact, detected crime, right? But it was quite openly detected crime, because one of the guys, Sean Drysdale, in the previous slide, we were both subbies, second lieutenants, and they invited us, the regiment, 156 Ulster Transport Regiment, invited us to a champagne breakfast, and the honorary colonel was there. So they fed us champagne, and then they gave us kippers. And Drysdale purposely insulted me. I fired a kipper at him and it landed in the honorary colonel. Thinking back, I should have taken a deep breath before I took that. But then military life has always perplexed me somewhere. This is something where AI hasn't worked. A person in military uniform talking on the phone. We didn't have phones then, of course, not mobile phones. They got the job because the National Grid Company had a problem. And again, so the National Grid Company is the electrical transmission company in the UK, and they've 400,000 volt electrical. If you go to work for them, you've got to learn to climb pylons. I'm not particularly happy with climbing pylons, but pylons I climbed. Pylons indeed I climbed. What's it doing now? I knew I should have put it in the desktop. Something said to me, put it in the desktop. But the problem was impulse noise. And there's a thing called the equal energy hypothesis, which I set out to try and use. We'll just restart it and I'll busk in the meantime. So the impulse noise thing which they were trying to solve, and I did a few technical things with an equation that had been put together by Burns and Robinson. Professor D.W. Robinson was an engineer, right? And they had 759 people to form the basis of a cross-sectional study by which they deduced how people went deaf, right? And there was an equation that they used with a tangential function in it. And one half of the distribution came from one place, and there's another half of the distribution came from another place, and they put the two distributions together. It was great. And I was talking to my boss, Malcolm Harrington, about this. And I said, I'm a bit confused about how did they do this? And he said, who do what? And I said, Professor D.W. Robinson at the Institute of Sound and Vibration Research. And he said, give him a ring. And I went, ring Professor Robinson? Yeah, ring Professor Robinson. So I rang Professor Robinson. He was a great guy. I talked to him about 3/4 of an hour, and I said, how did you get that model to fit? Because it's very elegant. And he said, we smoothed the data and threw some of it out. Now, the moral to that story is, if you're dealing with what you think is health data, do ask a biostatistician, right? It is essential, because he was an engineer, a physical and acoustic engineer, and he was a brilliant guy. He volunteered for the RAF volunteer reserve, ended up in the Middle East, and he got imprisoned. And in his obituary, it said that Douglas W. Robinson carried the scars of that experience to his death. Like all veterans, he wouldn't talk about it. Like my father was a radio operator in Lancasters, and he went to Berlin towards the end of the war, never spoke about it, wouldn't say a word. And lots of veterans are like that. You've got to get them talking about their experiences and telling a story. So then I went on to do an Excel spreadsheet which used this algorithm which they developed. And to this day, I use it to assess whether a person's deafness is due to noise or not. Because ACC is taken to this it's a fiendish stratagem, really, that everything's due to age, right? Because as you age, you get a bit deafer. As you age, the bones and the joints, they get a bit stiffer. But what ACC forgets is that with age goes to exposure to whatever you're trying to deal with. And we call it cumulative exposure. And that cumulative exposure is the thing that matters when it comes to looking at disease. And for diseases of the spine, for instance, there are ways of doing it that only what's called twin studies can get the money to do, because they've done MRI studies of twins to show that there's no effect, basically, but they're wrong, because forces acting in the spine can cause spinal damage, I think. It's all right. So, dioxin. So then when I came to Otago, I continued my PhD because my supervisor was Tar Ching-aw. He died a couple of years. He was a really great guy, but he was a crap PhD supervisor. And the only reason that I managed to pass my PhD using the algorithm, going through everything in detail, was Sheila Williams, also a school teacher, who didn't let me away with anything. And I had my data had to be extremely clean before I did anything with it. But I managed to go on the European Educational Programme for Epidemiology. Thank you. In which I learned to do. Thank you. In which I learned to do something called logistic regression, which is a very dangerous thing to have a doctor in charge of. A thing called logistic regression. Oh, I love that sound. Look, this is what here. That occupational hazard. This is how you go deaf, right? This is what deafness looks like, and that is the progression of deafness. You get this dip. How are we going? No, I'll need to hurry up here. And the mechanism is we still don't know what causes it, right? Because we have this thing in the ear called the cochlea, and on top of the cochlea there's hair cells, inner hair cells and outer hair cells, and noise knocks them off somehow, gradually. And it's the noise energy that does this. And using firearms does exactly the same thing. And it's something to do with the blood supply to the cochlea, because there's a thing called vibration white finger as well, and it's nitric oxide in the endothelium and the nerve sheaths in vibration white finger, and I'm sure it's nitric oxide in the ear as well. Still, there we go. Right, we've talked about that. That's the algorithm that they developed and we use. And here we have two biostatisticians enjoying the European Educational Epidemiology course at Siena, which is good. And you can ask Helen Harcombe what it's like. She's been. I recommend Siena in the spring. There we go. So, yep, we're behind. We better move on to Veterans Health shortly. Calvin, of course, Hobbes knew all about this. The problem involved imaginary numbers, 11, 10, 30, 12, and all those. It's a little confusing at first. And Hobbes had never gone to school, of course, but it's instinct. You can do fun things as an occupational physician as well. This is the bridge of the Kaitaki. Now, if I'll show you. Here's how it's driven. Now, if you want to find out what it's like to be in the bridge of the Kaitaki, is it safe for you to stand up? Is it safe for you to stand up? Nobody's drunk. And if you'd like to just slay slightly backwards and forwards, without falling over, in a nice gentle motion, that's the bridge. What it's like to be in the bridge, and if we're all quiet and do it, there isn't any more noise than that either. So what the driver does is he operates these two levers that you can see, and the lever at the side to adjust the speed and the pitch. And then, it used to be you did the bridge telegraph, not no more, the driver does it directly. And here we have, in the engine control room, in the engine control room, not going to run. It's very noisy, right? And they got me in to measure whole body vibration, but the whole body vibration wasn't enough to cause any damage. Bad enough. Twiddle those levers in the right way and put the pitch of the prop right, it starts vibrating all over the place. And so on my final visit to the Kaitaki, the vibration was okay, and I saw this. We talk about dBA, but there's a thing called dBZ. And when you looked at I thought, oh, I'll look at the dBZ, and the noise was about 82 or 83 decibels, which is nothing, but dBZ was 105. And it's that low frequency noise, I think, is causing the problem. And here we have, right, the dioxin problem. I eventually did get published after I got to know a bit more about dioxins, right? Dioxins, Dow at New Plymouth was a project I really enjoyed because it was involved with a plant, and I got involved with the public, and I got involved with the action group up there and talked to them all, right? The action group, very angry to start off, but after 2.5 to 3 hours, they eventually settled down and said, yeah, well, you know, it's okay, we'll believe what you find now, but back then it was much different. And it was another equation, excellent stuff, but that way we could work out what everybody in this study had by the way of dioxin in their blood at the time and work back their exposures and did the epidemiological study. And the basic dose response thing is to look at, you know, very low, medium and high levels of dioxin in the blood, and there was really nothing in it. Even when we did the dose, we estimated the regression curve for it. The other thing we did, a group of us, was Mapur, where they decided to build a remediation plant for a chemical plant in the middle of a residential area with a big drum, rotating drum. And they heated it up to high temperatures. And the residents saw this coming out of the stack. It was only steam, of course, but they were worried about this thing. So we got the contract, which is doing good. No crime at all in this, by the way, right? We decided we'd do good. And this is the sheet of results you get when you ask for a dioxin test and send off your 200 mils of blood. That's dioxin here, but you get pentafurans, hexachlorodioxins, all kinds of stuff. And I actually sat down, everybody in the study had their blood tested, and everybody came back. And they wanted the results. And we went through them one by one like this, and eventually everybody was quite sure whether or not they considered there was a hazard or was not. We did the same at New Plymouth, gave everybody back the results. And I think 28 people out of the 150 at the plant came in for the results. And Mapur, everyone, all the people in the study and all the controls came in. Right, Veterans Health. We had a Veterans Health theme going a while ago. John was involved in that. Brian Cox was involved in that. Brian and John and I have been working, and Darryl Tong have been working on the health of Vietnam veterans. So there's a number of things we had to do. We actually did get eventually a PhD. Magdalene Harris is looking at how tertiary education, military identity and mental well-being can work for Kiwi veterans. And intend to submit, Brian and I, a major project for funding by VANS, a cohort of all veterans. Now, Veterans Affairs says they don't have any data, but they do. We have it. Brian has it, actually. I've been interviewed by the special, Mr. Smith, again, who came to see me to make sure that the data was being held securely under the Official Secrets Act. So I've been through that. I've had a disciplinary interview with a senior officer, but she wasn't senior, so I didn't pay any attention, so that's good. 2010, 2011, I volunteered to do a year at Burnham, and volunteered Dell to come with me. On the 4th of September, there was a Darfield earthquake, 19th November, Pike River, and then 22nd of February, the Christchurch earthquake, which closed Christchurch, basically. We were at Latimer Squirrel. I was sitting in a packing case at Timaru Airport, and Dell was down on Izone Drive, outside the Fire Service headquarters, and the air was blue. with what was happening because it was still shaking, right? So Kilo Lahi, this was the first response. Everything was over by the next day. We looked at fire, police and ambulance, providers of essential services, utility workers, Marley Wardens, Red Cross and teachers. Baseline survey with 3 follow-ups, right? So sometime after the earthquake. But we were looking at PTSD and what protected against PTSD in this group. So we had psychological measures. The important ones were the social provision scale, really, and a measure of distress, the GHQ-28. And after an earthquake, you can't have this thing called post-traumatic growth. Most veterans do well through their experience. Some do badly. The ones that have PTSD do badly. But we looked at this for these groups, police, ambulance, teachers and non-traditional firefighters. And we found 2 groups of PTSD, right? 2 trajectories of PTSD. PTSD, no PTSD. The prevalence 37%, 24% and 24% after the earthquake. Now these were just symptoms of PTSD. It wasn't clinical PTSD. What we found was that, an 8% increase with the impact of events that had happened. I'm sorry about the odds ratios. 17% increase in PTSD for social support, which intrigued us. And other psychological measures, you can imagine what denial, disengagement, venting and humour. So everything over 1 there, PTSD is increased. Anything under PTSD is decreased, and 0.85, fortunately not significant, but humour seemed to help, and it was probably black humour, and there's nothing wrong with that really. So the best model, that was the best model for social support. At least it's going backwards very quickly, which is good. So it seemed counterintuitive that social support didn't seem to help these people after the earthquake. And military veterans, this is a yes, because we couldn't get the military to participate in this study. They were too slow. It was brilliant. So we had 2 choices: keep calm and carry on, or panic and freak out. There we go. Just a little bit about spirituality. Richard, we did a study of chaplains and spirituality, and the chaplains are the best people in the world. Wonderful people for calming the spirit and making sure that your crime remains undetected. But there's got to be some better help than going to the padre for a cup of tea and a bun. So we eventually did get money to look at the physical health of contemporary NZDF veterans from the Veterans Health Advisory Panel, which has about $3 million in trust. The trust hasn't been making much money recently, so they haven't been funding much, but at least it's there, right? I was on the Veterans Health Advisory Panel, but I got chucked off it. I don't know why. Brian Cox, you were on it as well, Brian. You got chucked off too. No, you stayed. Oh God. Right. So the Inaugural visual analog scale. How well do you feel today? And it's not a sideways scale; it's an up and down scale, right? Worst health you can imagine at the bottom, the best health you can imagine at the top. And we looked at, why did I put this slide on? Told you not to. Yes, right, okay, so the things on the left-hand side are categorical variables. So sex didn't matter, ethnicity didn't appear to matter either. So the Maori people in the Defence Force, when they're serving, are no less worse off. If you deployed, it actually made you feel better. Trauma made it worse. Over in here on the right-hand side, psychological flexibility helped a little. Now, this is a continuous variable, so that's important. And sleep was the single biggest indicator that a veteran was good. So we were searching. During my time at Burnham, we had people leaving, lots of people leaving, and I couldn't find anywhere for them to go to get help. They were walking out the gate, and I spent my time trying to get them a doctor or a psychologist in the town to which they were going, and I thought, this isn't good enough. What we've got to do is identify risk factors early, and sleep is one of those things. Ask a couple of simple questions instead of filling out silly bloody forms that not informative, and we can get help for those veterans. And I'll come on to how they're getting help in a bit. And they need help because of this. Veterans compared to the New Zealand population, more significant problems: mobility, self-care, usual activities, and pain and discomfort, the highest level being for pain and discomfort. We know why this is: lower limb, hip and back injuries from load, from jumping off vehicles, and all the rest of those good things. Mirror row of veterans, the same joint problems. They're also worried about neoplasms, but they're mostly skin cancers going along with the skin conditions here, because the Navy does get a lot of sun exposure. Gulf War syndrome is the other thing we thought we'd look at. Because Sean Drysdale, he went to the Gulf and wrote back to me about what conditions were like. It was the battle to end all battles, the mother of all battles, and it just sort of fizzled out in the end. Thank God for that. Because we in the transport regiment were all packed, ready to go, and we didn't have to go, and that was okay. Possible causes, they looked at all kinds of things like vaccinations, like the fumes from the oil fires, what else? Depleted uranium from munitions, another problem in the Balkans, right? And they had started to look at psychological distress. So what we did was, with the previous study that we'd done, we included a multi-system illness questionnaire. And this is what Claire Cameron, who struggled with this a bit, because it's a complex thing, even for a biostatistician. And we got 3 groups of symptoms, which we labelled arthro-neuromuscular, cognitive, and psychophysiological. Joint pain, muscle aches and pains, unrefreshing sleep, forgetfulness, sleeping difficulties, avoiding doing things or situations, fatigue, and distressing dreams. And a discriminant function showed that those were predictive of PSD, predicted more symptoms. And the worrying thing about the whole thing is that in the Australian Navy, in the Australian Navy, they showed that the more symptoms and the more severe they were, they eventually turned into real disease. So that was a big problem. Transition's important, right? And that slide's got into a bit of a mess, so I'll just bring it up. Do you like mind maps? I've always loved mind maps. I do very untidy mind maps, but a veteran has a pre-service background, and then during service his or her career develops, and sometimes they get technical skills, sometimes they get leadership potential, and if you're in the infantry, the top soldiers become trackers, they become scouts, and they become snipers, right? So their qualification is tracking people down and making sure they don't live too long, which is an area that's not highly sought in civilian life. However, what we need to do is make sure that the leadership potential of these people is recognised. It's not necessarily their military skills, because a military person thinks differently. So these are positive: career development. Negative, right? Adverse health effects: injury, physical, psychological, and moral injury. And I haven't got a lot of time left to talk about moral injury, but moral injury is awfully important. Just lest we forget the 10 people that have been killed in Afghanistan between 2010 and 2012. I was on tour anyway. Yeah, I had just left, so my colleagues were having to deal with the fallout of that. Right, the military. Yes, it's regimental. Yes, it's hierarchical. But mission command's the important thing about that. Because in the military, it comes down from the top and you're told what to do, but not exactly how to do it. So you've got a lot of latitude in what you do. And here are soldiers on parade. They don't look as if they're enjoying themselves. But it's fine. They've just got their serious faces on. They really are enjoying this. The flicker of a smile out there in parade can bring down the wrath of God upon one. So one has to look serious. Not too serious, not too angry, but that's all fine. This possibly could be considered morally wrong under some circumstances. Now, an important thing we did was this study of loneliness, right? So it looks complicated, but isolation is the most important thing for a veteran. Not just physical isolation, living out in the West Coast somewhere, but social isolation. And individual factors are experiential, a thing called experiential loneliness. Nobody's experienced the same thing that you have. And they don't have people that they can talk to. If they've got connectedness, if they've got social support of the right kind from somebody who understands what they're talking about, that is all a huge help, as is veteran support. So here's just some of the quotes that came out of that. It was a medical student study carried out, trainee intern project. You don't want to know. Clinical psych said, don't tell her because you're going to do is traumatize her, and to the point where she pushed me and I said I was involved in this, and then she changed overnight. 6 weeks later I had to end things, it was all out of control. And comments about knees, disability. And this is all the same participant. This person was very telling. And they hit the wall mid last year, and Veterans Affairs couldn't find anyone for me to say no, and they sent me to, he said, guy knew nothing about military or PTSD, but he wants to talk to you. I said, look, it's not going to work, but I need help, so we'll go along. After 20 minutes, the guy had gone pale. I had no idea what to say or do. Now, it's all about storytelling, right? If you can get veterans to tell their story, they'll bring things out, because they're usually stuck with something, somewhere. And Tapora, and she's in the audience today, Kia ora Tapora, got this really brilliant study, He Toa Taumata Ra, The Many Resting Places of Courage, which is a Matarangi Maori framework to it for storytelling. A framework to it and a framework, Matarangi Maori framework to deconstruct those stories and find out what's going on here. And the stories we've been listening to are really help veterans to find, and in most of these, I think, would it be right, Tipora, they're usually stuck somewhere, stuck with something. Something's happened to them. And it's just finding out what that thing is and getting them to deal with it, or helping them to deal with it, for goodness sakes. A pathway, so where's the future? A pathway to care for New Zealand veterans with pain and distress. It was an idea of Mark Compayne, an ex-RSA support services manager who was working for MSD and now wishes he was back with the RSA. Battlefield acupuncture, developed in the US military. It was developed by the US Air Force, a colonel in the US Air Force, along with veteran-ready training for practitioners, which is not a difficult thing to do. Yes? Getting people to become, there's a short training course that you can do, which teaches you a wee bit about the military, so that there's practitioners who want to see veterans and are willing to help them. And a thing called focused action and commitment therapy, which gets a veteran within a couple of sessions. If it doesn't work within a couple of sessions, it's too complex. To talk about the thing where they're stuck, to get them to deal with it. Sometimes it's about going out, friends and activities, right? And you just get them to work a wee bit more every day at undertaking activity. But Acupuncture New Zealand is now on board with this, so we have a nationwide study going We've only got 50 veterans in it so far. We'll see where it goes, but it looks to be good. So the next thing we need to do is to finish the stories, which to put we're well ahead at the moment, which we're going to do, get those online so that veterans can say it's all right to tell them a story. I can talk, and there's someone I can go to who's going to actually listen to me with the ear of enlightenment. And we're going to find out the other thing, why social support doesn't help. We suspect it's, statistically speaking, it has collinearity with distress, which is what the problem is. The next thing that we need to do probably is some structural equation modelling to identify where distress and where social support lies in that pathway. So I'll be trying to recruit another biostatistician very soon. Claire, it's all right, you're off the hook. Yeah, so this is what an RAP looks like, a regimental aid post in Afghanistan. There's a doctor, there's a nursing officer, and there's a senior medic, right? And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, not all there, junior medics. But it was a group like this that had to deal with all those casualties that happened all at once. And the person I handed over to, Kit Boys and Dave Footy, did a great job establishing a casualty clearing post and getting them out and saving a lot of people who were hit, including Afghan interpreters and Afghan military police. Okay, so I think my time is my time up? Just about? Good. Thank you all so much for coming tonight, and yeah, it's been. I hope you've enjoyed it. We don't usually do questions, do we? No. What? I have to come back. Oh, God.
Can you hear me? Yes, great. Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Bob Hancock Saho. So I'm the head of the Department of Preventive and Social Medicine, and it's my role to thank David for his lecture tonight. And I think you'll agree with me, it was really wide-ranging, fascinating, entertaining, and very enjoyable lecture. I do have a confession to make, sorry David, that the woman who wrote to you that letter from the BMJ, I was at med school with, so I claim no responsible.
A hard woman.
Yes, I remember her well. Thank you, David, for a really entertaining and wide-ranging lecture, and we've learned a lot about your very richly varied work. I know there's a lot more that you've haven't dwelt on. You haven't told us much about your time in East Timor, or even much about your time in Afghanistan, and also all the work you've done to help occupational medicine within New Zealand and within Britain, and improve the workplace well-being and health of New Zealanders and people elsewhere in the world. I also want to thank you personally for what you've done for workplace well-being in our department, because having an enthusiastic, good-humoured and nice person like you certainly improves our well-being at work. So thank you, David. There's a small token of appreciation for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. I'm Trish Priest. I'm the Acting Pro-Vice-Chancellor of the Division of Health Sciences, within which Preventive and Social Medicine and David is. It's always a delight to come to an inaugural professorial lecture. It's especially a delight when it's someone who I've been down the hallway from for many, many years, and have enjoyed lots of interesting and amusing conversations. Not had some of that silliness still definitely there. I just wanted to thank David again. My task is really to invite you to come and have some refreshments at the staff club after we have thanked David one more time, and thank you all for coming.